Hey everyone, welcome to Middle School Youth Online. You'll notice my setting has changed. I'm not filming from the church right now, and that's because I'm actually filming the day before Sunday on Saturday. And so I had to film from home just to get it done. This is going to be a little bit of a shorter video this week, and that's just because I had some other stuff I had to do video editing wise for the main service, which your parents and probably you have just watched. I promise we will play 2 or 3 games in the Zoom call later on, but just a bit of a shorter video. So what I want to do is we'll do a God in My Life, which I think I'm actually going to do this week, and then we'll get into Teach, which will be a video from the Bible Project. So let's get into God in My Life, where I'll share just a little bit about what God has been doing in my life recently. All right, it's me again. So here's what God's been doing in my life recently. Up until this week, quarantine hasn't really affected me negatively in any ways. My mental health's been good. I've still kind of been working out and doing stuff like that. I still get to keep my job and I still get to see you guys every week. But this past week, I think some mental health stuff really caught up to me. I started feeling more down. I started having like very little motivation to do work, which sucked because I had a lot of work to do this week. Anyways, one thing that you might not know about me is I actually have trouble sharing my emotions with people. I'm okay if I'm happy. I love sharing times when I'm happy. But when I'm feeling down, I don't really like to tell people about it. And part of that comes because that's kind of like how my dad was. Anyways, we've talked about this before in middle school, but as Christians, we're supposed to rely on one another and on God. And I don't think I really did any of those things this past week. I was struggling, I guess emotionally, like just feeling a little bit down. And I didn't really pray about it, and I didn't really talk to my wife, Laura, about it, who is a Christian as well, and who could probably give me some good advice and help me through my mental health and my emotions. And so what God has been showing me is that I actually need to rely on those people in my life and rely on Him in my life. So if you're in a place where you're feeling a little bit down these days, don't be afraid to talk to your mom or your dad or even your siblings and talk through your emotions and stuff like that. And maybe you're like, hey Ryan, I don't even relate, I'm not feeling down. Then you could actually be that person for someone else. So you can actually go, this is gonna sound crazy, but you can go and talk to your parents and say, hey mom and dad, how are you doing? And they might just say, you know, I'm doing fine. And if they say, I'm just doing fine, say, how come you're doing fine? And then you guys can kind of have a conversation. Because I think it's important that we as Christians, and even you guys as middle schoolers, I know you might be thinking that you're young, but you can have a big impact on someone if you just have a really real conversation with them about how you're feeling. And if you are feeling down, like I said, don't be afraid to have that conversation with people. It's a lesson I need to learn, and it's something that God has been showing me this week. So yeah, I guess that's what God has been doing in my life. So I think I want to send us right into the Teach now. Typically what we've been doing is having 2 leaders or teachers have a conversation about a basic practice that Christians have, like going to church or praying and stuff like that. This week, I found a really good video by the Bible Project, who I've talked about before. They talk about what does it mean to be made in the image of God? Because that's something that a lot of Christians say, hey, I'm made in the image of God. But what does that really mean? So we'll talk about that in our small groups, and I think the Bible Project has a really good animated video for you guys. So I'm going to play that, and then I'll see you after.
So if you lived in ancient Bible times, odds are you lived under the authority of a king.
And many of these kings claimed that they were gods, and they would even call themselves the image of God.
Meaning they had authority to tell people what to do, order things to be made.
Yeah, they got to define good and evil. And these kings would often make statues of themselves, which in Hebrew were called tselem, often translated as idol or image.
But for Israel, they didn't view their kings as the God. In fact, they were never supposed to even make images of God.
It's exactly right, and that was really unique for that time and culture. This is rooted, first of all, in Israel's belief that you can't reduce the Creator God down to any one thing in creation. But there's another reason. People aren't to make images of God because God has already made images of himself.
When did he do that?
Well, let's go to page 1 of the Bible. And the first person we meet there is God. He's the one with authority over all creation. He speaks and creation obeys, and he defines what is good and not good. In other words, he alone is king. But then surprisingly, as the pinnacle of all of God's creative work, he makes humans, and he calls all of them the image of God.
So he gives all humans the authority to rule.
Exactly, that's what he goes on to say. He tells the humans to subdue the earth and to rule it. And so this task that once belonged only to elite kings is here in the Bible the task of every human being. This was a revolutionary statement in its day because all humans are being called to rule and to participate in the human project.
So what does this mean? I mean, how are we all supposed to rule?
So the picture we get in Genesis is gardening.
Gardening?
Yes, gardening. So they rule the earth by cultivating it, by harnessing all of the earth's raw potential and then making something more and new out of it.
So growing food for each other.
Yes, but that also includes growing families then, which become neighborhoods, and then they create communities where people are going to work and take care of each other and build businesses and cities that will expand to new places and so on.
So ruling is really the day-to-day acts of our work and creativity.
Yes, we take the world somewhere. This is humanity's divine and sacred task.
Yeah, and this all sounds really nice. And humans have designed some pretty great things. But just as often we create things that cause a lot of suffering and a lot of injustice. So maybe we shouldn't actually be ruling.
Yeah, so the Bible addresses this. In Genesis, what happens is that God gives humans a choice about how they're going to rule. So are they going to use their authority for the benefit of others, which is God's definition of good, or are they going to turn away and define good and evil for themselves and use their authority for self-advantage?
And in the story, they choose to define good and evil on their own terms.
And so this is the Bible's depiction of the human condition. So sometimes we pull off amazingly good stuff, but just as often, despite our best intentions, we act selfishly and we create evil in the world.
And so we're stuck as mediocre rulers making a mess of things.
But that's not the end of the story. So the Bible goes on and it makes this claim that all of this was resolved when God bound himself to humanity through Jesus. And he showed us what it looks like to truly rule as a human.
So what does it look like?
Well, Jesus ruled by serving and by seeking the best for others, by putting himself underneath them and loving not just his friends, but also his enemies.
And that's not a typical way to rule.
And not only that, Jesus confronted the consequences of all of the evil and the death that we have created by our messed up ways of ruling. And he takes it. I mean, he lets it kill him. And so when the New Testament writers looked back to Jesus' resurrection, they see a whole new future opening up for all humanity.
Jesus is a new way to be human.
Yeah, that's why they called Jesus the image of God, or the new human. And not only that, they also believe that Jesus' divine life and power is now available to heal and to transform us to become our life and power.
And this sounds really nice, but what does it really look like?
So practically, the Apostle Paul said it looks like people being filled by Jesus' own presence and spirit, filled with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and integrity and gentleness and self-control. He says this is the new humanity that God wants to create in us so that we become people in whom God's image is being restored, people who will move the human project forward. And that's actually how the story of the Bible ends. It's a renewed world where God is on his throne and his servants are all around him, but they're the ones ruling over this new world, taking it into new, uncharted territory with Jesus as their healer and their guide.
Well, thanks for watching the video, everyone. You'll notice I'm in a different shirt in this clip, and there's a reason for that. I'm actually filming the next day now, which is Sunday, right before church. And the reason I'm filming now is because Paul Walker, our pastor, sent me this article this morning. So it seems that the Zoom servers are currently down, and we tested it, me and Paul, and even me and Laura tried to call. So it looks like we won't be able to have small group discussion or Zoom games this week. But I'm hopeful that next week we'll be back to usual. But for now, I guess I'll see you next week. You guys, you're made in the image of God, and he loves you. So have a blessed week.